Hello, everyone. We have the usual suspects in the house. Glad you guys could join us. Julia's absent Greg at the moment, but I'm sure he's not too far. Bob, Ganya, of course, on the wheels of steel, mixing it up. Uh, exactly. Meryl, thanks for providing the space and time. We're going to have a continuation. There's Greg. How you doing? We're going to have a continuation of the conversation we were having 2 weeks ago. We took a week off. It was kind of impromptu, but hey, everybody got to recharge the batteries, technical stuff, whatever. We here, and we're going to finish what we started, and even though it's never finished. So I'm definitely all the way focused on the importance of media, and even to the point that my thesis, my work in history is concerning depictions of Black Americans. Primarily for me, it's Black men, so Black masculinity, but then it encapsulates portrayals of Black Americans across the board. Um, I believe that media is all powerful in America. We have made it so, and with all that power comes some responsibility, especially when we leave so many of the most exploitable exploited in that realm. So I'm going to start tonight off with a clip from a conversation that Nichelle Nichols, who was, I think, Aurora, and I could be dead wrong, but on Star Trek, she was the only Black female character who was reoccurring, famous for the kiss with Captain Kirk. Uh, Very good interview. It is 11 minutes, but I only plan on using a portion of it because she's talking specifically about the Black exploitation period in cinema. But she really goes further and confirms my perspective and point, and actually allows for me to know that I'm not alone in my way of thinking of how media and how important media is. So I'm going to play the clip. Please take from it what you may and come back to the space with a good, robust conversation. I think it will spur that. So that's how good it was to me. So let me share screen. And here we go.
Yes, my name is Raymond Tyler from Real Black TV. A pleasure and an honor to meet you. I have two questions. One is, could you talk to us a little bit about being the first person to be involved with the Interracial Kiss on national TV? And two, did you make a conscious effort to avoid the Blaxploitation era?
I made a conscious effort to jump in at feet first. Because we did not at that time refer to it or even think of it as Black exploitation. It was an opportunity for Black writers, for Black directors, for Black stars, for Black actors behind the scenes to get experience, to get known. And Gordon Parks had done the Learning Tree, and my son happened to play Gordon Parks, Newt, the star of that, Kyle Johnson. And I saw what could happen from there, and he was the one who really opened the door for Black people to have an opportunity in filmdom, where it was going to be seen. Unfortunately, what the studios were very interested in which became Black exploitation, was the seedier side. And no one saw it coming, what we were doing, because as actors, you're playing a role, not being yourself. You're playing a role. And before you knew it, that's all that was out there. So I did one film, Madam, but that was 40-some years ago, and I didn't play another one until now, and many other roles in between, but no more black exploitation films, because after that one, all I saw was the opportunity to show, women to take off their clothes, black men to leave their wives and have bastard children running around, to be dope artists and to demean the black race, and never seeing while that exists, never seeing the other side of us, of who we are, the diamond faceted persons that we are, like anyone else, any other culture. And I resented it deeply, and so I turned down opportunities, and they wouldn't cast me in anything else, and so I went back to theater, my first love, until things started moving around, and then right after Star Trek, the conventions, Star Trek conventions, which were fan produced and organized, came along, and there was one somewhere every weekend in the world. It spread like wildfire, and so we stayed in the public eye, and that took 10 years later to the 6 major motion pictures of Star Trek. And the other question you asked me was about the Interracial Kiss. We were always looking to the next script, because one was better than the other. What I was not looking to is great scenes being constantly cut in rewrites. There was a reason for that, and for that reason I wasn't terribly thrilled. It was the end of the first season, and I went into Gene Roddenberry and told him that I was getting these offers since this was after the first season, and that I wanted to get back to my first love, which is musical theater and live theater. And he said, "You can't do that. Do you know what I'm trying to do? Don't you see?" And he said, "Wait a minute, this is Friday. Take the weekend and think about it." And the next night, on Saturday, I was a celebrity guest at I think it was an NAACP fundraiser, and I attended, and I'm at the dais, and people are coming in, and one of the producers or organizers of the event came to me and said, "Miss Nichols, there's someone who really wants to meet you. He's a big fan." And I said, "Oh, certainly." And I got up and turned around into the face of Dr. Martin Luther King. I could not breathe. I mean, that expression, waiting to exhale. And he smiled, and when he laughed, I think that's when I kind of began to exhale. And he said, "I'm the fan, and my whole family is a fan of yours, and my little children." And then he says, "And I want to congratulate you on the quality of your work and the quality of the character and so forth." And I said, "Well, thank you, Dr. King. I'm going to miss my co-workers." And he said, "What you talking about?" And I said, "I'm leaving the show after the first season." And I told Gene Roddenberry. He says, "You can't do that. You cannot, you cannot do that." And I wanted to say, "What you talking about that?" And he said, "Don't you understand what that man is doing? He's changed you. He's put you in the command crew. You're fourth in command. You can't abdicate this. You're out there on a 5-year mission where no man or woman has gone before." He says, "You have changed the face of television forever. You cannot do that. For the first time, the whole world is seeing us as we should be seen, not just as beautiful entertainers and and domestics. He said, for the first time, there's a whole human being there, beyond the beauty, beyond the talent, the musical talent, in science. And it's not a mistake he made you Chief Communications Officer. And I thought right then it used its sense. Yeah, I get to tell everybody where to go. but I listened fascinated to him. And he said, do you know that how important this show is? This is the only television show that my wife Coretta and I allow our little children to stay up and watch. And he said, this is so important. I said, and this is right in the middle of the civil rights marches and programs. And I said, when it began, I really wanted, he says, no, we don't want you there. We have enough marchers. We have enough famous people. We need you on that great communicator. We need you on that screen. Because this is 300 years from now. That's telling the world it already is. We are there. What happened between now and then begins with our marches. What happens there is you cannot leave. I could not leave. I went back to tell Gene Roddenberry, and I told him what Dr. King said. Gene Roddenberry is 6'3", hatchet face, big ex-cop, motorcycle cop, World War II fighter pilot. And he sat there at his desk, and he looked up at me, and he said, thank God for Dr. Martin Luther King. Somebody knows what I'm trying to achieve. And a tear ran down his face. I almost lost it. I said, thank you, Gene, and I got out of there. And he was a dear friend, and he saw to it from then on that less of and I never complained that my scenes were protected more. And I'd like to say,
all right. So I am definitely interested in what you guys thought of that. It was just wonderful for me finding that clip or showing up on my timeline, finding it, showing up, whatever it was. But for me to be able to get some what I would call reverse confirmation, because I wrote my thesis, and if I began my thesis with Gordon Parks, The Learning Tree, which starred her son as Newt, as being the potential for better depictions of Black Americans. And she speaks about it in the way that I intended to communicate it to anybody who read my thesis. So that was years, that interview was years and years before I even approached any secondary degree. Matter of fact, I was still getting my first at that time. But yeah, I just want to say I had to play it in its entirety, and I'm sure you all saw why. When you get the second half of the conversation, and Martin Luther King Jr. recognizes the power of that great communicator. That's something I'm emphatic about. So yeah, first off, we can begin with just your thoughts about what you just saw. Meryl, I'll come to you first.
Yeah, I got several thoughts. I was thinking as I was listening to her talk about Dr. King in particular, and that show kind of catching his eye. And what I think about compared to how things are today is people who were in movies and especially television shows were much bigger and influential figures because you had a lack of selection. I mean, today everything is niche. It's like a little niche. Like you can watch something online, or you watch something on that is like this weird show on Netflix or a show on Amazon, and there's like a few people who watch it. So like, it's cool to have representation in all those spaces, but like people in a role like she was on, like millions of people were seeing that show every week at the same time, watch it at the same time, reacting to it. And so that's really interesting to me that he had that vision, or wanted her to make sure that she continued to kind of be that representation. The thing you kind of highlight about being a great communicator, and kind of having that as a message, if people would listen to it when they were or hear it when they're watching the show. I look back and think about other shows that depict, what the future looks like growing up, and I typically didn't see. I was like, man, it's going to be real tough for Black folks. I didn't see any Black people on the Jetsons, and I didn't see too many Black folks when I was watching Back to the Future, the second one. So it's really interesting to be thinking about when people are putting together like these movies and ideas about their concepts of what's going to happen in the future, it's still kind of based in that what's going on today. So I thought that was huge. And I also was struck by her because she knew she had this platform. She wasn't willing to act in the exploitation movies for she wanted to represent herself in a certain way, and she also was really curious and critical about the people who were producing the material. And so just just outstanding.
To your point, man. Her first comment when they asked her about Black exploitation, she's like, no, I jumped in feet first. These people wanted jobs. They wanted to act. They wanted to see alternative depictions. In my thesis, I talk about Sidney Poitier covers this wide time frame from let's say the 40s to the 60s, and he, as a character actor or actor in films, progresses in the way he reacts to certain situations. He goes from lilies in the field, guess who's coming to dinner, to Mr. Tibbs, and the heat of the night, and he gets to be more aggressive in his responses to some depictions of racism on screen. But that's in the shadow of the civil rights movement. Reality and art are definitely reflecting each other in these moments. And you have a great film like The Learning Tree to come out and give people, it's a Hollywood production, studio production, well made, well done, and Gordon Parks' first efforts based on his first book. He was a pure and true Renaissance man. I advise anyone to look him up if you're not familiar. But you get that, and then 3-4 years after, maybe 5, Hollywood is going broke, and they're like, man, Black folks are coming to the movies. Let's just make some films with Black people. Yeah, another Sidney Poitier film. Yes, Learning Tree is an awesome film. So yeah, they just start churning out all of the things that she said, hey, wait a minute, this isn't what I thought it was. I don't want to be a part of all of that. Sure, you get to see Black faces on the screen in those white spaces, but you more and more saw depictions that were detrimental to the true reflections, the wholeness of Black American life.
Yeah.
And I have other points to make around that, but you have more you want to say, Meryl, before I got somebody else? Okay.
No, those are the main takeaways.
All right. Julia and Greg, what did you guys think of that clip?
I loved what he said. First of all, I wonder what she would have done. I mean, talk about chance meetings. If she hadn't met Martin Luther King there, she was ready to quit. So I think that's an act of God right there. The fact that he said, we've got plenty of marchers, but here is your opportunity, your creative contribution to society. And the fact that he let his children watch her, and we need examples. Young Black people need to see Black women and men as doctors, as scientists, as communicators. And Gregory got me starting to watch Star Trek. So she was awesome in Star Trek. And I just thought she was brilliant just now, and everything she said, like Meryl said, there were so many points, but well said.
The only thing I might add is that it was like a practice in taking the bigger picture. She was reflecting on it as an artist personally, that she didn't want to partake in something that wasn't reflective of her values. But she was advised by a higher wisdom, a higher ground, someone that saw the bigger picture and advised that there's some good that can come from this. So stay the course, keep your morals, keep your values, but stay the course and allow what you're doing artistically to play a bigger role.
Absolutely. It is kind of serendipitous how things work. And when you hear those little stories that, you would not otherwise know about if it wasn't for someone who was curious to kind of understand the circumstances behind somebody's career choices, especially when they're a public figure or someone is a celebrity, so to speak. So, yeah, Star Trek, I believe, runs from 67 to 69. It's not on the air. Or is it 66? 66. It's not on the air very long. But in that small window of time, in which MLK is assassinated in 68, right. In that small window of time, we now know that the portrayal of a significant Black figure in the future, he had some impact on that continuing and becoming what we kind of take for granted now. Understood that she had a place on that ship. The responsibility is not necessarily in the hands of the artist or the actress or the actor. They're looking for jobs. A wonderful actor that I don't mind mentioning, but I don't want to deter too far from what we're speaking of. I did an interview with him when I was doing research for my thesis, and I didn't use the interview, but I still speak to him here and there, and he's an older actor. But hey man, I'm still looking for work right now. They're looking for jobs, and they're not the ones that we can hold accountable for what they have to choose from. That comes from somewhere else, and I firmly believe that a lot of the stuff that we see that me and Meryl spoke about 2 weeks ago on here is because of who's creating it. They go outside of the communities they desire to reflect on screen to get stories that don't necessarily match up. And I have another good point to make about that in a moment. I think it's a good point. I don't want to say it is and it's not. So we'll come to that. Bob, let me get your take on the interview. What did you think about Michelle Nichols' interview?
Yeah, I thought the interview was wonderful, but I think that situation. Well, let me back up. Words I use a lot around this kind of topic are modeling, intentionality. To your point, Gene Roddenberry did this for the right reasons. And that gave her the opportunity to play that role. And it gave the world the opportunity to see that, which especially during the time that it was on, it showed, it modeled, it reflected a message that was consistent with how things should be. It wasn't capitalizing on how people perceived people to otherwise be. And had it would have, when we show on TV the side of things that's the side of things that we want to get away from, That's not being helpful. And yet the people that come up with the topics, come up with the stories, especially, I think it's worse now, are driven by profit motive and driven by sensationalist motive, not driven by social good. And so in that case, all the elements aligned, right? Gene Roddenberry, she was already successful, so she had some clout into her, of her own by being successful in the theater. Martin Luther King happened to put his 2 cents worth in there. And so it was kind of like, the perfect positive storm of things. But how often does that happen? And that's the issue. And we are entirely too happy to do what we can do to make a buck. And to your point too, Felton, most actors are trying to get a job. They're trying to get in there. And so they take what's offered up to them, and they can only not take what offered up to them once they have the power to say no. And until you have the power to say no, you're vulnerable, and you got to eat. You got to take care of your kids.
And it goes even to the point of something that I've been commenting on of late, the casting of people who don't have an attachment to what it is to be Black American in iconic in portrayals of iconic Black American figures. And you can't even halfway have a conversation about that without it turning towards some levels of tension or disagreement, or it's just, I don't have a problem with it. I'm not asking for you to have a problem with it. I'm asking that you acknowledge a trend, and it clearly is one. And it becomes demeaning at a point when Black American actors exist and are stepped over in a institution, in a entertainment business that is founded in America. Hollywood is still, bar none, above and beyond the producer of entertainment for the world. And we see a significant lack of elevation of Black American actors at some point. But there's a rub there. So people would maybe make the argument, well, what about Mel Gibson? What about, I forget the guy that plays Thor? There's an influx of Australian actors, but they purport the same messaging in terms of understanding the conditions of white people, no matter where they reside, but fully in 3 dimensions. And we have yet to really, really do that in terms of Black people. And if we did at some point during the cinematic existence or the existence of cinema, then maybe I wouldn't care that there's a Black British actor playing Martin Luther King, or a Black British actor playing Fred Hampton, or a Black British actress playing, Harriet Tubman. So there's an imbalance that exists, and that existed and still exists. Sidney Poitier was from the Caribbean. Doesn't mean that there's not value in the work. I think 12 Years a Slave was a great movie, and Chiwetel Ejiofor is British also. But there's no condemning the performance for me. It's the lack of opportunity for those that have more connective tissue. And whenever that's communicated, it is what are you talking about? Hey, almost like you saying something that just makes absolutely no sense, when it can be discussed, it can be talked about. Let me get off that soapbox for a moment, though.
Let me make one comment about that, though. Yeah. I think that giving, when you're talking about a role that is significant relative to civil rights and so forth in this country, giving that role to someone that's a descendant of that heritage is an act of redemption unto itself. And I think that there needs to be appreciated that particular value too.
Yeah, there's a, to me, it's a no-brainer at certain points. God, I remember watching an interview with the guy who played Fred Hampton in Judas and the Black Messiah, and his name is escaping me at the moment. I think it's David something. And he's like, "Oh, I couldn't believe when I read this stuff how Fred Hampton was this and that." I'm not going to try an English accent, but he has one. But yeah, I couldn't believe what I was reading and how this guy did this things and okay, you couldn't believe it because it probably was not anywhere near your purview or in anything that would resonate because you did not grow up in this country. So even at points, there is some actor that, including the one in the film, Lakeith Stanfield, who plays Willie O'Neill in that film, who plays the bad guy, so to speak, the guy who betrayed Fred Hampton. He talked about wrestling with the fact that he wasn't going to get to play the American icon that he had some connectivity to. And lo and behold, I think we talked about it a couple weeks ago, who won an Oscar? You know, the guy who played the Black British actor who played Fred Hampton. I digress.
Well, Felton, I want just a couple things. Stories real quick. I mean, I'd argue there's probably a bunch of Black American 25 to 20-year-olds that were just as clueless about Fred Hampton, you know, unfortunately. And then I do see a trend of it's who's telling the story that allows, you know, for more folks for the experience to be shown. Because I look at, you know, some of the stuff Regina King does, and like there are plenty. She goes out and makes, you know, there's plenty of Black American actors that she puts in her stuff. Ryan Coogler,
who she does? Who?
Well, everybody that's in the movie. Who's British in the in the movie she did with the One Night in Miami?
The guy who played Malcolm X. Him certainly.
Oh,
that
him,
was
okay.
There was some issues and problemation with that portrayal. But
okay.
And she got some pushback for it, but it's always, you know, hey, these are artists. He played the role perfectly.
Yeah.
But I do want to mention I didn't watch it. I watched some of it.
Ryan Coogler, everything he does, man, just
solid. No. I love Fruitvale Station, but you know, Black Panther incorporated David, the game.
Daniel Kaluuya was in there.
There you go, Daniel Kaluuya. And that's fine. I don't want to.
You were in Africa though, so
I don't exactly, and I don't want to paint myself into a corner. But it's an American production. It's made in America, right? So this is critically important. I don't mean that these 25-year-olds and even some of the undergrads that I work with are familiar with people like Fred Hampton. That's not my point. There's a connectivity to their experience and what they know of the immediacy that exists here, the intimate connection that they have to this country. Something resonates when they find out about somebody like Fred Hampton. And it's not, I can't believe that this guy was doing it. That's not the reaction that you generally get. It's generally, and I literally had this moment this semester, it's generally like, yeah, they don't tell us about people like that. We know something is out there, people exist, but all we ever get is MLK, Rosa Parks, Lil Malcolm X, Harriet Tubman, you know, but we know people like this are out there, but they don't tell us. So there's a difference in that reaction, Meryl, and that's what I'm speaking of. There's a connectivity, there's an experience that is innate to being a Black American that is looked over and just stepped aside of, and you know, like Ava DuVernay blocked me for basically not even saying a whole lot about it, but just like, hey, you know, you mean to tell me you can't find Black guys? I don't remember what I said, but I know I'm not a Twitter guy anymore, and I don't do Twitter a lot anyway, so it didn't hurt my feelings. But how powerful do you think media is? That's one of my questions, and I'll couch it because I don't want to run out of time again, and I definitely enjoy this discussion. How powerful do you think media is? And I like to think that you guys are already agreeing that it's pretty powerful. So I'll give you this aspect in terms of shaping American culture and shaping our societal values, how we disregarded this at times and spells in terms of especially Black American depictions. We haven't put the work in to make up for Black exploitation, to have those fully, what did you call them, diamond depictions, you know, all of these many facets. Black exploitation type stuff exists, but we have other depictions that they just don't rush to fully develop. I'm couching this around the fact that I think it was 1915, Birth of a Nation is made, D.W. Griffith. Birth of a Nation, the original film, was about Reconstruction, basically, post-Civil War, depicted Black people as barbarians and rapists who couldn't keep their hands off of white women. And hey, this is what the real Reconstruction was, and this is why the Klan, the movie was based on a book called The Klansman. This is why it was okay to lynch and kill, because Black folks were just monsters and terrible. And this was a grand film at the time it came out. So much so that then President Woodrow Wilson screened this film at the White House, and it is said that he said the film was like writing history with lightning. So how powerful is media? Powerful enough that it shaped the Jim Crow era, and a film, Birth of a Nation, brought the Klan back in America. Yet we minimize it when it comes to other aspects and reflections of society. We minimize how important it is, and how the responsibility should be paramount for proper depictions of Black folks. But with that in mind, respond how you want, because I feel like I'm talking way too much, but respond how you guys want to with that comment in mind. And also quickly, if you guys can remember to answer this question, how many of you know who Oscar Micheaux was? I'll start with you, Bob.
I do not know who Oscar was. As far as the power of the media, I don't think it's possible to overstate how powerful it is. And you know, the Birth of a Nation, I mean, it gave Woodrow Wilson a big tool, a very extraordinarily well done for its time tool to advocate the Klan, and that's exactly what he did. And it imprints us. What we see on the media imprints us, and what we see more predominantly, you know, today we have so much deceitful representation of information on the media, and yet people drink it hook and swallow it hook, line, and sinker. And you know, there was a time back in the early 60s when at 6 o'clock you'd watch Walter Cronkite, and everybody in the world believed Walter Cronkite. Everybody believed him. And what he said was heard as truth. Whether it was or not, you know, we thought it was, we believed it was. I like to think it was. I have no reason to think it wasn't, but that's not true today. What we hear on the news isn't necessarily true today. And what we hear on the news today generally has some kind of edge to it to make it more interesting or sexy, or pick a term. And if all the stuff we're watching that's fiction conveys a particular impression, or if the majority of it does, then that becomes our reality. That becomes, you know, we've become a nation more of media and fantasy than we are of facts and science. And that's terrifying.
There's a responsibility that's been skirted, and me and Meryl have talked about this before. It's never been as we would truly appreciated in terms of ultimate truth telling and a consistent adherence to shaping a positive and fair and balanced world, if they chose to, with this great communicator, as Dr. King said.
Well, and I will add that in the Walter Cronkite days, there were a lot of things that weren't said. There were a lot of truths that weren't articulated, just like there's a lot of history that wasn't in the history books. So, you know, there's the matter of what's talked about. There's also the matter of what's not talked about. And, excuse me, and until we talk about everything truthfully,
in context,
until we talk about everything truthfully in context, then we've got a problem.
Yeah. And you know, we have went further in the wrong direction over the last 30, 40 years. And that's where we really can, and that's what I was saying to you that time, Meryl. That's when you can really put the focus on, well, we lost the Ed Murrows and the Walter Cronkites and some of the more above board discussions. And we just entered into these silos, these, you know, Rush Limbaugh world and CNN, hey, everything's breaking news. So we lost that balance that used to be required. It used to be required that you had both viewpoints on your show. But now it's no longer required, and you can just have one way of thinking, and that's how we get to where we are. Julia and Greg, do you know who Oscar Micheaux was, and what are your thoughts on the power of media?
Felton, I don't think I recognize that name. And I'm not sure exactly how to respond to some of the issues that are being offered here, except that I do think about the effect that Martin Luther King had on that moment, back in that Star Trek moment. If we could achieve that level of objectivity, and I'm not saying that we all have to be living saints, but if we can simply turn off the television, turn off the radio, and think for ourselves, walk in nature, and develop our own thoughts from a deeper place, and turn off some of that static, that we might be able to respond better to situations. And that's really what we're looking for now, is response from thinking people.
Pick up a book, right? I totally agree with some of that. You know, we have come so far away from developing critical thinking skills. And I think time outdoors, time engaging your mind with the written word, conversations, I hope, such as these, you know, get out of your own headspace sometimes. But to the point of the power of media, Greg, the primary thing is we have to acknowledge how much it shapes us. How, and I was going to get to this question. We don't have to get to it tonight, but I definitely wanted Greg, Julia, and Bob on the line in terms of where you come from. And matter of fact, we'll come right back to it after Meryl responds, and I'll tell you who Oscar Micheaux was, and then we'll come back to this. So you three, be thinking about this. How much of a role did media play in what you thought of Black Americans or Black people in general before you really encountered them? And I mean that if you did not have them in your immediate surroundings, if you have any possible examples of how your thoughts about Black Americans were shaped via the construct of media. And I'll come back to you guys as we get ready to wind down. But Meryl, I want to come to you. Oscar Micheaux, do you know who he was? And
don't know who Oscar Micheaux is. Feel like I've heard the name before, but not familiar with the name. There's so many. I know we don't have time to go into this deeply, but media is really crazy, man. I mean, like that question that you proposed and had Bob and Julia and Greg think about. I mean, I think about media power is generational to me. Especially like where I was talking about like images and things that you saw on TV. You know, there are people who don't get a chance to interact with all types of different type of people. So if you're from the South, you know, living in the rural South, and then you see depiction of what, you know, a New Yorker is on a TV or a movie, or what California is, or watching Leave It to Beaver as a kid, and like that's supposed to be like that's the standard of like how things are supposed to be, and then you internalize that as a person that doesn't really have that other than just living in this country, but you know our standards, you know, for Gen X, probably millennials and millennials back are based on things that we saw on TV. And so our standards for excellence are based on that. It was like this big swell of pride when the Cosby Show came on, because it was like showing a depiction of a family. Like this is what a family's supposed to look like. I know if you're a Black person, then you should aspire to be this. And if you're anything less than that, then you're not in that. You're not special, or you didn't really make it. So media is really powerful for these young, for kids that are Gen Z and whatever we're gonna call this COVID generation. They don't watch TV. They don't watch anything. You know, they watch stuff on YouTube. They watch each other.
15 minutes.
They watch and they watch each other, and they get their cues. They do things that they know are wrong, but if their friends think it's okay, they're gonna get some likes. Then it's important. We had a bunch of yahoos that, you know, ran up on the Capitol January 6th that were, you know, that are victims. Well, not victims, but are part of this inability for people just in general to deconstruct the images and the media that they consume, and figure out, is there a reason that I'm getting this message from this place for a certain reason? And people just can't do that. And that is it's just resulting in some just horrible outcomes.
Man, you really said something that I probably need to recognize, because when I ask you guys that question, Bob, Julia, and Greg, I don't mean it as if everybody's impervious except white people to what's being depicted in media. I'm glad you said that the way that you responded like you did, Meryl, because I needed to be understood. Yeah, you see a movie about California, you think, oh, everybody's gangbanging or something. You see a movie about New York, everybody's trying to get over on you, Kanye. Mm-hmm. But I'm asking that question basically with the understanding of how powerful media is, but just to hear if there are examples that are precisely going to, in some ways, confirm my argument about how much a failure media has been in its depictions of Black Americans. And I mean that, like, is if there's a story of ours to be told, you might get one or two here and there, but you're going to predominantly get these two-dimensional and some points one-dimensional character depictions that don't fully flesh out the experience of Black Americans.
And that's enough. You know, one of our viewers, Aviana, put in, you know, perception is reality. That's so true. All you need is like that you've already had that confirmation bias. You see that image that, you know, oh yeah, you know what? I think that, I saw that, so I'm right. So, man,
there's a really good podcast I recommend to anybody that listens to podcasts. It's called, I might have to just send it to you guys, but it's, they did Ahmaud Arbery, this, his situation and his unfortunate murder this past season. Inconvenient Truths, or I know that's not it. It's something Truths. Buried Truths. It's out of Georgia. The guy who does it is works at Emory. Very good podcast in total. Listen to all of it if you can. But they did Ahmaud Arbery really quickly. I'm listening to some of the recap episodes this yesterday or whatever, and they were talking to I think it was the DA or one of the lawyers down there. White guy who basically says to the young white student who's interviewing him, hey man, you know, you live a little bit longer, you'll see. Wait till somebody breaks into your place and steals your stuff. This conditioning that has taken place in certain areas via media, via legacy and lineage, just has some people in the area thinking that he had to be up to no good. He couldn't have just been running through the neighborhood jogging. He couldn't have just been looking at that house which was under construction I have been in neighborhoods and just stepped into a house that was under construction. It's pretty fascinating to see what something is before it's a finished product. So the rationalization, even to up into the lawyer, he's basically saying, hey man, telling this young white kid, you'll see one day what kind of people they really are. That's essentially what he was saying. And that takes some shaping and molding. So real quick, Oscar Micheaux was a African-American, Black American filmmaker who made quite a few films, kind of prolific for the era, but he made films that depicted Black people as a whole, three-dimensionally. And one of his films was called Within Our Gates, and it was like a counter to Birth of a Nation. He talked about Reconstruction also, and talked about some about Reconstruction, but he talked about some interracial stuff that took place. He had a character in there that was a fair-skinned woman who was about to be raped by her father, a white man who didn't had relations with her mother, who was Black. How complicated is that? How complex is that? How interesting a story is that? But he's lost to history pretty much intentionally, him and his works. And if it wasn't for, I believe his films were found in like Paris or somewhere, which that happens a lot with Black American stuff. It gets found somewhere outside of the country. And for doing what he did during the time that he did it, man, and he died in North Carolina, he died in Charlotte in the 50s. For him to do what he did during the time that he did it, for him to attempt it, amazing. But how much energy goes into destroying that narrative? How much energy goes into the fact that he sounds familiar, never heard of him? I mean, that's intentional. Some of that becomes intentional. So with that being said, I want to make this last point, and I still want you guys to there's a really good thanks for that. So I want you guys to just still answer that question to take us out of here, Bob and Julia, but I'm going to make one last point that I really wanted to make. There's so many great stories, yet we don't, in large part, tell new ones in terms of the Black American experience. There is always going to be, in my experience, some attachment to Richard Wright, Zora Neale Hurston, Ralph Ellison, James Baldwin, Lorraine Hansberry, August Wilson, because those were great stories. Those were great tales of Black American life. Richard Wright wrote Native Son, one of the greatest literary efforts in American history. And he was a dynamic, awesome writer. Invisible Man, gosh, man, complex book, but once you really delve into it, you can't put it down, right? Ralph Ellison, outstanding American artist, American writers, Zora Neale Hurston, of course. So those stories keep getting somewhat recycled in some ways. And I'll go August Wilson. Right now, Denzel has it set up. I think he has a 10-11 picture deal with Netflix to produce all of these August Wilson plays because they're good stories. This stuff exists, and there are others trying to tell it, but there is some suppression, and just be happy with what you get mentality. Actors need jobs, right? So with all of that being said, I'm going to leave it to Julia and Greg, and then Bob, you take us on out of here. If you have any example, any thoughts about what I was trying to get across, if it makes sense to you to respond to it. Julia and Greg, any things you watched that kind of shaped how you might have thought or gave you some preconceived notions before you actually met people like me?
You want to unmute?
There you go.
I was a first grader in Chicago. My best friend was Edgar, and he was Black. And I have never analyzed that, except that he was my best friend. There was no, there was nothing in that formulation of a friendship other than we liked each other. In terms of media, Felton, you said it's storytelling, and I agree. Art is storytelling. It doesn't matter what the media is. It is storytelling, and that storytelling has a capacity to tell truths and give principles on multiple levels. People can look at a picture, they experience it in different ways. They watch a film, they see something, hear something in different ways. So I'm going to offer this one thought. We were with a bunch of kids, white and black, up in the mountains of North Carolina about 4 or 5 weeks ago. Bob Winslow was there as well. We saw a miraculous, natural event where these kids ran up into the mountain, up into the woods in the dark of night. They refused flashlights. White and black kids from families that did not even know each other until that evening. And they had the most fabulous time. That story is yet to be told, and we're going to tell it. We're going to be making a presentation on it. 3 families, 1 white, 2 black, and connections that were made were phenomenal. And that story is yet to be told. They were not limited. They were not schooled in any way. They went natural. They went wild. And everybody else stood back and watched in awe for 3 days. And we learned.
It is a conditioning, Greg. I agree totally. When I was in elementary school, my best friend was a white guy named Shane. Right down the street, stayed in the trailer park not too far from where I live now. And the innocence, when it's lost, when the conditioning occurs and you start to notice different things, and nobody's born with this idea of hierarchy or superiority. I would have loved to have witnessed that, man. I agree, man. Get outside, get away from some of these influences.
There's more to the story. There's more that we're going to need to share with you, Felton. Personally, we really want to share this event that took place. There's so much more to tell.
I look forward to it. Hey, you know how to get me. I look forward to it. Julia, did you have anything you wanted to add?
I just wanted to say, yeah, we need to get together and share with you a young man we met who started a business called Black Folks Camp 2. And it's fascinating, the reason why Black people don't camp. I just want to share, and I keep saying it over and over again, but I had my best friend in 5th grade. We moved from Stamford, Connecticut to Charleston. And the very first friend I met, Irma Williams, she was Black. And we were the best kickball players. So we were great buddies. And we walked to school, and I brought her home with me. And by the time I took Irma back to school, all the neighbors were calling my parents saying that can't happen in Charleston, South Carolina, if you're going to stay in this neighborhood. And that was something, it still breaks my heart.
That's the conditioning. That's the beginning of the conditioning. Yeah.
But anyway, we're on the right track by having these conversations.
I look forward to you guys joining us. Hopefully on the 27th at 6:30. It's going to be about the history of policing in America, and I think Dr. Parker is an awesome professor, and I hold him in very high regard. So I look forward to that. So yeah, the conditioning was right there, and you knew something was wrong with it, right? You felt off with that, Julia. And you can speak to region a little bit in this conversation too, Greg. You're in Chicago, and don't get me wrong, I know for a fact racism exists all throughout this country. It's in the life's blood of this country. But you're in a little different space. In Charleston, there's a little bit more out and out, we can't have that. So yeah, I appreciate you guys for sharing that. That was wonderful. Bob, do you have one to take us out of here with?
Yeah, and Greg and Julia, y'all owe me some contact information because I think that the cousin of that guy that started that company lives in Greensboro, and we intended to have some follow-up get-together, follow-up conversation, and I don't know how to get in touch with him until you tell me how. So anyway, yeah, you know,
what's his name, by the way? Maybe I can do that offline because I met a young brother in a good stewards meeting that was talking about that very topic, but it's offline.
Cool.
Let's do it.
You know, I'm fortunate that I have always known Black people in a positive way. I don't remember a time when I didn't. I grew up with Black people, and there were economic differences around the Black families and the Black people that I knew. That's another topic, but in terms of relationship and perspective, it was always good. And so when I was like, this is really dating me, but there was a show called Amos and Andy on TV that was taken off the air, as I understand it, because of its negative depiction of Black people. I looked at that as a bunch of as comedians. They were hilarious, and I enjoyed the show, but it didn't influence my perspective of Black people any differently than Jackie Gleason influenced my perspective of white people. Jackie Gleason was a comedian. Amos and Andy were comedians. From my perspective, they were just doing their work and making me laugh, but it didn't affect my perspective. Same with the shows like Donna Reed and Father Knows Best. And, you know, if you were an underprivileged Black person looking at that thinking that's white normal life, it's not. It was, I mean, that was so mythologized in every way. And, you know, as a kid watching that stuff, you know, I saw the mythology or the comedy or whatever of it for what it was, and it didn't inform my perspective of what Black life was or white life was or any of that sort of stuff, because I measured my experience for what it was, and that was what anchored me. That said, white people that I know that have negative perspectives of Black people have never really known Black people. They just never have. And they have developed their perspectives somehow else. And it's storytelling, it's inherited messaging, it's all of these kinds of things. They've never had quality relationships to build their own judgments. Their judgments are built on story.
So I know
we're
a little bit over, but I have to. I don't know if you're aware of this, Bob, but it's kind of ironic. That is ironic. Amos and Andy is based on a radio show where some white guys did their best blackface impressions of Black people. So it's based on a stereotype of a stereotype, right?
Yeah, and I don't know that history. I just remember as a little kid, you know, seeing the show and laughing.
Now, it definitely predates me, but I recall people in my family being entertained and referencing it, and I saw it and I was like, I don't know what the heck, looks crazy. But the more you know, the more you grow, and you come to find out what we can bring this conversation almost full circle. Those Black actors, comedians, talent need roles. They need jobs. I know one of those guys was responsible because I just watched the Billie Holiday documentary. I want to say, he says he discovered her. Hey man, they needed work. The work to be had was based on a radio show that had Black folks sounding crazy to me and talking how they
They
talk.
were crazy.
Yeah, and being under the guise of humor and comedy when it was purely stereotypical blackface, Al Jolson style, and it was meant to set a precedent in terms of how black people were to be depicted in those spaces. Now, it is fortunate for you, Bob, that you did not have to, allow that to be your only gateway into Black American life. But I'm sure so many were and just can't figure out, well, what was wrong with it? But yeah, that's one of the things that was wrong with it, man. It was purely it was a radio show where two white guys did the raspy voice and, oh, I can't wait to do it, all that little crazy shit. That, I'm sorry, stuff that they decided they decided we were, and it got elevated to the point that, hey, we need some real actors for this. Blackface won't work anymore. They find talent, and it's a fascinating thing, right? I have a reference to a guy named Burt Williams in my thesis also, who was a black man who did blackface. Man, there's a whole conversation around the psychology of all this we could unpack. It's fascinating stuff. But anyway, anybody got any last words before we get out of here? It is great to see you all, and Greg and Julia, I look forward to catching you guys. Maybe we can do lunch. I know me and Bob are scheduled for a walk tomorrow, I believe. If we can catch a lunch, or I would love to hear about the story in the mountains. I would love to hear that. So yeah, let's set that aside and get together. Thanks everybody for tuning in. Don't forget about the 27th special day and time. Well, special time, 6:30. We'll start a little early. Be a really good dynamic discussion on policing in America. I have some more asides that I'm going to share before we begin, and then Dr. Parker's going to talk. But it's going to go into detail about how we get to the point of Black communities being over-policed, and it has roots in slavery. It definitely.
Will we get a link?
Oh yeah, we're gonna send it out. Yeah, we'll send it out. Yeah, definitely. You guys are always on the link list. You got it. You're gonna get it. So
thank you, UNC 100.
Yeah, and it'll be on Zoom. Yeah, absolutely. It'll be on Zoom also. So we're going back there so we can have more people. So yeah, definitely looking forward to it. Appreciate you guys. Anybody, any other last words before we get out of here? Danya, thanks for producing a great show. And I always enjoy this, and this is just one of my favorite topics. So y'all take care. Have a wonderful evening, and we'll talk again soon.
See you tomorrow, Felton.
All right.